Let's get a word on this. Chris Daw KC, barrister and broadcaster, is with us, as is Norman Brennan, director of the Law and Order Foundation and, of course, a former police officer of more than 30 years. Afternoon to you both. Chris, I think this is probably the number one thing you and I have locked horns about many, many times, sending people to jail. You say it doesn't work. I don't know why. I still, I lay in bed and think about this stuff, Chris, I think about our conversations. Chris Daw said prison doesn't work, but if you're in a prison cell, you're not committing any crimes.
I'm so happy, Ian, that you lie in bed with nothing else to think about except me, criminal justice and prisons.
Well, I'm usually reading your book at the time. That's the reality, Chris.
Oh, well, that's so sweet. Listen, Ian, the truth of it is that there is a group of people clapping their hands every time you say, let's build more prisons. And they are the private companies that build prisons, because they love the idea of more and more private prisons, which make more and more profit for them. And we've built so many of them already. The one group of people that it won't impact upon is the group of people who commit shoplifting, for example, as an example. Most of them homeless, many of them addicted to alcohol or drugs or both. And they are the group of people who tend to, on the whole, be responsible for the great majority of shoplifting in this country. And if you send one of them to prison, the reoffending rate for them coming out of prison is about 68% within 12 months. If you send them to prison, if you put them on a program involving rehabilitation, drug courses, and a non-custodial sentence, the reoffending rate drops to just 20%. So you take your choice in. You can either lock them up.
I think you're being a bit disingenuous with some stats there, Chris, aren't you? I mean, you've taken a narrow window. If I got a caution at a police station for shoplifting, are you saying there's less chance that I'd go out and do it again?
Statistically, absolutely, yeah.
Just a caution,
absolutely.
no rehabilitation.
Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, cautions are a bad idea because they effectively give people a criminal record, often for very sort of low-level behaviour that would never be repeated, and yet there it is on the computer forever that they've been in trouble with the police.
OK, Norman Brennan, so prisons in this respect don't work, according to Chris. What are your thoughts, Norman? You've nicked more than your fair share of tow rags at it, whether it's shoplifting or anything else for that matter. What do you think to what Chris said?
Well, the point of whether they work or not, Chris and I will agree and disagree on certain aspects of this. The reoffending rate is huge, which is not helpful. But let me just tell you who actually goes to prison. There's two types of people that go to prison. It's where the crime is so serious, murder, stabbing, rape, a robbery where people have been injured and lots of money stolen. And it's only right that on the first offence that those individuals are sent to prison because the crime is deemed so serious. The second type of person that goes to prison are those that have normally exhausted, and I'm a bit confused about this caution business today, they've been normally exhausted up to 12 alternatives from imprisonment, which starts as a warning, a caution, local rehabilitation, drug programs, you name it. Many of these offenders are given that opportunity to stop offending. The sad reality is that those two groups of people that I have just described are the most dangerous and most persistent nuisances to society. So if a magistrate or a judge deems that the crime is so serious or so persistent and they fail to adhere to any alternatives that they should go to prison, how can we have too many people in prison? Because we've got the right people in prison.
Well, that's it, isn't it, Chris? Because, to get into jail, you might have heard me say it before, right? If I went out and nicked a car tomorrow, I wouldn't go to prison. No, I could nick 10, I wouldn't go to jail. I'd probably have to get to my 50th offence before I was even considered to have a custodial sentence. So, I mean, the idea that not sending people to jail works better is obviously a nonsense too, isn't it? Demonstrably a nonsense.
Well, it's demonstrably true. I mean, it depends what you call nonsense.
They're committing more... So they're getting nicked and they're going to court, but they're not going to jail. They carry on committing offences.
But the whole issue here, Ian...
But you're wrong about that, Chris, aren't you?
No, I'm not wrong.
I don't mind you saying that. You can put your hand up and say, look, I'm Chris Daw, I'm KC, I'm a very experienced law person, but I'm wrong.
I could do if I was wrong, but I'm not. The facts are absolutely straightforward, that when you impose short prison sentences for relatively, and I mean relatively low-level crimes, I'm not saying that they are nothing crimes, of course they're not, but as Norman rightly points out, there are a whole range of crimes that are far more serious than, for example, stealing a can of beer, which apparently is going to be subject to a mandatory prison sentence under the new guidelines that are being proposed. The evidence is crystal clear. Send people, particularly those who have alcohol and drug addictions, to prison for short periods, guarantee they will come out and commit more crimes. Guaranteed, almost 100% over 2 years. So you can carry on doing that, and you can make your statements that sound great for the radio.
But they committed crimes when they didn't go to jail, Chris. That's the point. That's why they're in jail, because they committed so many, they eventually went to jail.
Yeah, but the problem is that the escalation of sentencing, which Norman described, is entirely a failed system. Because what you should be doing is taking young people when they first get arrested, which almost invariably most people in prison were first arrested as a 12 or a 13 or 14-year-old. You need to divert those children from the criminal justice system at that age, and then you will find, miraculously, our prisons are only half full because those children have actually been reformed, they've gone back into educational training, and they've been diverted away from the lifestyle that they were leading when they became involved in crime.
Norman.
Otherwise, you can just send them to prison and they'll keep going back forever, and it will cost us millions for each one of them.
Okay. Norman?
There are three types of reasons why people go to prison, Ian, and Chris will know this.
There's only two a minute ago.
Well, no, it's three now. I'm giving you... No, in relation to victims. Chris, please let me finish. There's always a caveat. The three reasons why people are sent to prison in relation to victims and the public is to punish, to deter, and to reassure. The punishment is, as I said, the two types of people who go to prison I earlier described. That is to punish them, and it's to deter others from committing crime. Now, not every shoplifter, let me tell you now, Chris and Ian, you probably know, the police rarely ever turn up to shoplifting. I seen a robbery this morning in Leeds. A sword of about 3.5 foot long was used, 5 in a 4x4. The police are nowhere to be seen. When you have a criminal justice system that fails everyone, you have to ask and balance who can you help most. Well, the people that should be protected are the public, the law-abiding public, and victims of crime. And I agree, Chris, that people need to be rightly rehabilitated. The other alternative to what you say, Chris, and the stats that I remember from some years ago, those that are given terms of imprisonment to 14 to 20 years, the reoffending rate is 24%. So do we send people to prison for longer, or do we actually invest in rehabilitation? Because
that's a good point, isn't it, Chris? I mean, we need longer prison sentences, not shorter ones.
Except that the evidence is clear that the longer you lock people up for relatively less serious crimes, the more in the future you will have higher rates of crime.
Let me ask, just on that point, Chris, sorry to interject, but do you think if you were caught shoplifting and somebody sentenced you to 15 years in jail, I've got a funny feeling when you came out after 15 years, you ain't going shoplifting again, surely?
Oh, you're absolutely right. You'd be a drug dealer or an armed robber or a much, much more serious criminal, because you just had 15 years doing nothing but talk about how to commit serious crime.
And you'd risk going back to another 15 years.
Yeah, and amazingly, miraculously, Ian, and it's counterintuitive to most of us, but I've had so many clients over the years I had a client who committed another armed robbery offence 6 hours after he was released from a 12-year sentence for armed robbery. 6 hours. And that just showed, in a nutshell, how bad and broken our prison system is.
Norman Brennan.
Let me tell you, and as I say, I've got huge experience within policing and law and order in the criminal justice system. By the time we send people that are persistent offenders to prison, they have learned so much about crime that when they actually go to prison, which are universities of crime, the thing is, when you actually are in prison, you're not committing an offence. But many of these people that are in this university of crime have learned so many tricks already. There's little to learn apart from serving a short sentence and reoffending. The alternative is the open university of prison, which are the streets of Britain, where these criminals plague society day in and day out.
And on that point, gentlemen, thank you. Chris Daw KC, the broadcaster and barrister. Norman Brennan is the director of the Law and Order Foundation. He's a former cop, 30-odd years experience in the job. Which way do you swing on this?